I was hoping to get a few more videos under my belt before tackling today's topic, but the speed in which I get these projects done, not to mention the 2-week-long cold that buried my voice into a coffin of congestion, means I have to jump ahead a bit if I want this latest Final Fantasy VII video ready before this year's E3 showing. Did you hear this, loser? He thinks Final Fantasy VII is gonna show up at E3 this year. Well, if we look at the recent leak by Walmart's website and how many of those games have been confirmed so far, I wouldn't say it's beyond the realm of possibility. 2025 PS5 launch title, directed by Toriyama, 50% incomplete to later be patched as DLC. Yeah, okay. Look, I'm well aware of Square's ridiculous development times for their major Final Fantasy titles, but after 3 no-shows in a row, as well as a few other breadcrumbs beyond the leaked Walmart listing, I honestly do feel that this year's E3 will be the stage where the FF7 Remake finally makes its next major public appearance, with a hype new trailer and slew of information to make up for the lost time and radio silence. Maybe. Probably. I mean, 4th time's the charm. But anyway, today's topic is going to be relevant regardless of when the remake appears this year or next year, or the year after, so just bear with me. Ever since the announcement of the Final Fantasy VII Remake was dropped onto an unsuspecting crowd, like the support plate dropped on the citizens of Sector 7, there's been no shortage of anticipation/worry over how the original game's characters, setting, and themes would carry over to a more modern engine, as well as a modern audience that's grown less tolerant of the more, let's say, antiquated elements that made up the game's more adult content. Amidst all of these discussions, however, one question does appear to come up more often than any other. Indeed, it was the first question to leave my lips following my exasperated cries of fanboy undulation.
Where's Tifa?
Where's Tifa? Quite possibly the biggest question on every fan's mind at this point. Even though no official poll exists, judging by my own observation in the usual social media circles, it does seem pretty unanimous that Tifa is the character everyone is dying to see next in the remake, and after a long period of silence, I can't think of a better showcase for the next big trailer to renew hype among the increasingly jaded fanbase than having the world's best punch girl take center stage. Now look, I'm not saying that Tifa is more deserving of taking the spotlight than any of the other characters that have yet to show up. Okay, yes I am, but at least give me a chance to justify the reason why. Aside from being one of the most recognizable characters in the whole franchise, the big draw for Tifa, at least for me, has always been the fact that she's a martial artist who exhibits unrealistic yet still cool looking techniques. A character that primarily uses their fists and feet as their sole weapons is a rarity in non-fighting games, and it's only gotten even rarer over the years, even in media where once upon a time such guilty pleasures were plentiful. And yes, the fact that she's a woman does also add to the appeal, because it adds to the fantastical nature of the character in how she's able to perform near superhuman feats of strength that even the burliest of her male counterparts couldn't achieve. Anytime Tifa has been allowed to strut her stuff in a cutscene or CG work, it's always been met with big praise by fans. Just ask anyone who's seen Advent Children what their favorite scene was. Also, hey, you know what's in right now? Female characters kicking ass. Bias aside, I really do think it would be the smartest move by Square to let Tifa take center stage on the next remake trailer. It would be personally disappointing if they just unceremoniously revealed her with little fanfare, considering the big fan expectation and the opportunity to make the next trailer especially memorable, even the folks not intimately familiar with the franchise. Toss in a few scenes of her punching or suplexing a monster 10 times her size, and I guarantee you it'll get people talking. And on the subject of people talking and sizes, is it going to talk about the boobs now? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Like it or not, this does tend to be the most common online discussion about the character, and it's only ramped up as people wonder just how she's going to be designed for the remake. There's been all sorts of back and forth about what changes should be made, what is considered acceptable for today's standards, and what is unnecessarily prudish. It's an ongoing topic that is pretty annoying, but I do believe much of it does come from an earnest place. Nobody wants to see their favorite characters represented badly from a visual standpoint or otherwise, but it also raises the question over how the majority of fans perceive the character versus how they want her to be perceived. I've spent more time than I care to admit over this very topic ever since the original game came out, and now that Final Fantasy VII is finally getting the visual makeover that's long been overdue, it also serves as a potential reintroduction of the cast for a new generation, and that's why I figured now's as good a time as any to share my own thoughts on the controversy. Now, I want to stress that everything I say is based on my own personal observations and opinions. I'm not claiming to be an authority figure on the subject, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there better suited to talk about it than I am. I am not the emperor of Square Enix, we all know that's Tetsuya Nomura. This is just my own 2 cents about a controversial element that's played one of my favorite Final Fantasy character for decades, and it's honestly one of the big reasons I've wanted a remake to begin with. So from here on, I'm just going to go ahead and tackle some of the most common arguments that have been tossed around. Starting with the first question, is Tifa's design tailored for sex appeal? Well, yeah, obviously. As I mentioned in my last video, it's clear that there was an emphasis to make her attractive in a sexually appealing way, a decision that makes more sense if you subscribe to my earlier theory that she was originally going to be a recurring NPC instead of a full-fledged party member. Now, is that a bad thing? No, at least not inherently. When it comes to character designs, I believe it's usually the goal of the artist to create characters that are visually appealing, and as far as works cater to the older 13 and up crowd are concerned, that usually does mean creating characters that exude sex appeal. Where things tend to get problematic, in my opinion, is when one character, or in most cases one sex, is singled out in an embarrassingly unsubtle way. In other words, when all the dudes of your team are wearing protective armor and the one chick is rocking a bikini armor that is molded to accentuate her assets, that's when things get problematic. This is why I'm more appreciative of works that are more transparent in their goal to be as cheesecake and over the top as possible. I can't find myself to get entirely mad at something like Dead or Alive or Senran Kagura because they make no attempt to hide what they are. That doesn't mean they're free of criticism, there are limits to everything after all, but at least you know what you're getting into with just a cursory glance. So why do I care so much if Tifa, a character from a series literally called Final Fantasy, is portrayed in a pandering way? Well, because I take her seriously. See, I believe that context plays an important role when it comes to justifying a character design. Yes, I know that does lean a little too much towards the breathing through her skin argument, but I do think that one of the most important questions to ask regarding any character design is whether or not it fits with the setting and tone that the creators are going for, which is why an out-of-place character design can prove counterproductive and potentially impact the narrative. No, this doesn't mean that every design needs to be grim, dark, and serious. I mean, take a look at this guy for crying out loud. It also doesn't mean that sex appeal is automatically demeaning either. Look at Lulu from Final Fantasy X, for example. Okay, now stop looking for just a second. It's clear what the intentions were with her design, but she still exhibits a confident and flirtatious demeanor that, as admittedly out of place as her fur coat and cleavage window is compared to the predominantly tropical look of Final Fantasy X's locales, it never feels like the game is doing a disservice to her portrayal. In short, she knows what she's got and she rocks it proudly. There's another term that I feel is very important, and one that gets routinely ignored by video game fans and creators alike: moderation. Like I said before, everything has its limits, and stepping over those limits will almost always end in disaster. That rule applies to repetitive side quests, overly large open worlds, frustratingly difficult enemies, and yes, titillation. Some of the most celebrated games in history have always been the ones that know when to stop just before the point of excess, and I feel that includes character designs as well. And if you still don't think that an overly sexy character design can negatively impact an RPG or any other story-driven narrative, I have one single name for you: Pyra. I know, you're probably sick of hearing it, it's been discussed to hell and back, but in all honesty, just look at her. Pyra looks like someone maxed out the boob slider in a character creator while leaving all the other proportions at the 0 value. I really can't bring myself to justify her design at all. The only thing more baffling is how pointless it is. Throughout the 100 plus hours of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 I've played, there is maybe one mention in the entire game about her assets. Other than that, no commentary is ever made, either by the characters or the narrative itself. If anything, her design just makes less sense the further you progress in the story. Once again, you don't always exactly need a reason to justify a design like that, but in the context of Xenoblade and the fact that it wants you to take the character completely seriously, I just couldn't. I certainly wanted to. I thought she had a really well done story arc, as well as the rest of the characters, but when nearly every cutscene has her massive balloon chest in the way, it's just silly and unfortunate. Getting back into Final Fantasy VII, let's tackle another question. Is Tifa's design so bad that it even needs to be revamped? In my opinion, no, not really. I think it fits just fine with the rest of the cast, and it makes sense within the context of the setting. She comes from Sector 7, which is established early on as the literal bottom point for the city of Midgar. There's a grimy urban feel that is carried throughout the sector, where all the people are making do with leftover scraps of material that they can find just to live by. Heck, most of these people don't even live in houses. By comparison, owning a 2-story bar with a hidden compartment for urban terrorists is just one tier below Don Corneo's sex mansion. That being said, if there was one element to Tifa's design that I feel could use a modern redo, it would be her miniskirt. Yeah, okay, settle down. Seriously, I don't know why this is the one garment that fans want to die in their respective hills over. If you read any of the quotes by creators like Tetsuya Nomura, the skirt was always considered an afterthought in her design, and serves no other purpose but because it looked better for the character. That's all well and good. I mean, once again, you don't have to justify every part of a character design. They admit it's for sex appeal, and yeah, that's totally fine. But still, when you consider what the character's primary function is as a party member, it all goes out the window once you realize that she's a martial artist who likes to throw lots of kicks.
She kicks high.
And if you're wondering whether she's one of those type of characters who doesn't even care if people get a quick peek here and there, that's simply not the case. And sure, the remake could just not show her underwear at all. It could just put an empty black void under there like what they did with Princess Peach in Smash Brothers, but that seems like a silly and pointless alternative. Really, just change the skirt into shorts, or even a skirt. It's a small change, but it would go a long way to eliminate a long-running criticism about the character's design. Unfortunately, the amount of fan pressure, particularly in Japan and their whole thing involving skirts, leads me to believe that Square won't mess with this. Oh boy, and speaking of fan pressure, I don't see why her breasts have to be smaller. I have a girlfriend with large breasts, and I think it's disrespectful to assume that all busty women should... Yeah, okay, let me stop you there. You've probably heard that argument the most when it comes to the topic of Tifa's endowments. So remember what I said before about moderation and how most fans seem unable to grasp that term? Well, based on my own limited observation and conversations, when most people say they want Tifa to have large breasts, they really mean so honking huge that they threaten to rip out of her tank top where the very ground quakes amongst her jiggling boulders. I'm not saying this is the case with everyone, but it is clear that a significant amount of the fan base does feel that way, especially when you consider how often she's portrayed in fan art. No, I'm not going to link any of it. Google if you're curious. It's real easy. Yes, horny got a horny, and I'm not even saying that's a bad thing either. Arguments have been made that the more erotic fan art there is of a fictional material, the more popular said material is, and I do have to agree with that. There have been plenty of female characters before, during, and after Tifa's appearance that are way more sexualized, but don't equal even a third of total fan art that the character has. There wouldn't be such a dedicated fan base if boobs were the only appeal there. In a way, it's kinda flattering. But when people are unable to separate their own horny headcanon from the actual work, things become a lot less flattering. And part of me does continue to worry if the years of online smut material and fanfics might prove to be a dark influence over at the folks at Square. I know what you're going to say. Of course they aren't going to cater to that side of the fan base. Final Fantasy VII is their single most popular and recognizable game of all time. The remake is going to be an enormous big-budget game with instant mainstream appeal. There's no way they would stoop so low as to overly sexualize their main heroine. To that, I will respond with, just look at Cindy. Look at how surprised they were when people complained about Cindy. Look at how they doubled down and insisted that Cindy was fine and that her outfit was meant to signify that she was an outdoorsy type. And yes, I know, the team behind the remake is totally different from the team that made Final Fantasy XV. And hey, who knows, the whole Cindy backlash might have been a blessing in disguise, if it caused Square to be more mindful of the West's demand for better represented female characters. But going strictly by the track record so far in regards to Tifa's portrayal in both the original FF7 and onward, I would have to rank their official treatment of the character as mostly fine, but not perfect. As far as the original FF7 is concerned, she does become the butt of a few risk comical moments here and there, but in fairness, so do the other heroines, and yes, that does need to be revised a bit for the remake, especially in regards to Yuffie. But it's during the FMVs where most of the damage is done, with her proportions wildly exaggerated to the point of absurdity, not to mention the gelatin physics going on here. I have no doubt that her look in the FMVs is what played a big role in how the public perceives her, and it really is a bummer that it took so long for Square to course correct things a bit with her Advent Children redesign. Say what you will about her darker outfit and shorter hair, but the real reason I give her AC design so much praise is because it proves that there are some people in Square who do take the character seriously, and wanted to make sure she came across as something more substantial than mere eye candy. In fact, Nomura himself confirmed this during an interview, where he and the team struggled tirelessly over Tifa's design, making sure to strike a balance that accentuated her attractiveness without getting in the way of being a powerful and strong-willed heroine. See? Moderation. Nomura understands that word. Kinda. Advent Children aside, there's still the occasional crossover game where the devs like to draw attention now and again to Tifa's assets. The worst offender in my opinion was Dissidia, in which she's the only female character in the group to have jiggle physics. This by itself wouldn't be a big deal if it wasn't for the fact that she's the only female character that they were willing to pander to that degree. As if to say, oh hey look, here's the boob character. But honestly, in hindsight, these little nods and elbow pokes really are minor compared to how other franchises handle their ladies, so I'm not trying to nitpick too much here. But when you consider the ongoing fan perception that views Tifa in this matter almost 24/7, it really does feel like throwing a few matches into an already smoldering fire. I really do hope they do right by Tifa in the remake. Fortunately, having Nomura on the helm does leave me mostly at ease. Assuming they don't switch director duties partway in development like they did with his last major project. In addition to the work put into her design in Advent Children, he even redid an entire sequence from that movie as he felt that Tifa sounded too meek and timid on the first take. I feel he really does get what the character's most positive traits are, and will ultimately make good with the fans by giving her a really strong introduction in the next remake trailer. Will a more modest redesign put a stop to the erotic fan art and message board circle jerks that have plagued the community for years? No. If anything, that's gonna increase twofold, but at least it'll be nice to know definitively that Tifa is a character Square wants you to take seriously, a heroine that is as unique now as she was in 1997, who can fight with dazzling martial arts and superhuman strength, but still maintain a gentle feminine side as well as having multiple layers to her personality that include repressed feelings of anxiety, guilt, and love. Personally, she's my favorite female character in the franchise, and maybe video games period, so I can't help but continue to hope that she'll get the best representation she deserves. And I'll be waiting every year, same time, same place, in the hopes we'll finally get an answer to that question with the next big E3 showing. Too bad I won't be able to do that at my local movie theater this year. Thanks, Sony.